Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm going to try one more time. Good afternoon. Thank you. Yes, I'm trying to get everyone excited. So thank you all for coming today. To those of you who have joined us at our last Dialogues Across Difference event, welcome back, and very glad to see you. To those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you for signing up and for showing up. Your coming here today means that you are joining fellow members of our MIT community to learn together and to participate in difficult and important conversations together as one MIT community. We want to make sure that each of you has a space to be here fully and to engage thoughtfully with our speaker and with each other, and without worrying about social media. So we ask that you refrain from taking photos or recording during our time together. We have a team in place to record today's events. The camera in the back is focused on us at the front and not on you. When you checked in, you all received a bright yellow paper with 2 QR codes. One of the QR codes is for you to submit a question. The other QR code is for you to text stream of the program should you wish to follow along on your mobile device. If you need assistance submitting a question, please ask one of the members of our events team. All questions today will be anonymous. You do not need to include your name to submit a question. Our speaker today, Dalia Mogahed, sorry Dalia, will answer as many questions as she can. That said, she's likely won't have time to answer all of the questions during our Q&A period. So to continue our conversations, please join us for a reception next door after the program. For those of you who are observing Ramadan, halal takeaway boxes are available for you to enjoy after sunset. I encourage you to keep this dialogue going beyond today's event and to bring fellow MIT community members into our conversations. Now I'll turn the floor over to our president, Sally Kornbluth. Welcome, Sally.
Thanks, Melissa, for the introduction and for your ongoing leadership of standing together against hate. And I'm very grateful to all of you who have made the time to come here and join us today. We invited Dalia Mogahed to speak today to help us understand Islamophobia, its nature, its history, its dynamics, and its impact. A longtime scholar at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, or ISPU, Dalia is also one of the country's foremost experts on the demographics of American Muslims and the issues that affect them, including the experiences of Muslim women. The ISPU was founded to fill a critical gap: the lack of rigorous public opinion research on American Muslim communities. In her time as the ISPU's Director of Research, Ms. Mogahed built their pioneering research program with the specific goal of providing comprehensive data to better inform both public policy and the national conversation. Before her work with ISPU, Ms. Mogahed served as Executive Director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies. There, she co-authored the 2008 book, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. Based on 6 years of research and more than 50,000 interviews representing Muslims across more than 35 nations, it stands as the largest, most comprehensive survey of the global Muslim population ever conducted. In 2009, President Obama appointed Ms. Mogahed to the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations invited her expert testimony on U.S. engagement with Muslim communities. Today, as our MIT community confronts the challenges of building understanding across painful divides of history and culture, we could not ask for a better guide than Dalia Mogahed. This afternoon's program consists of her talk, Islamophobia, A Threat to All, followed by a fireside chat led by Professor Lily Tsai. The Ford Professor of Political Science, Lily Tsai is a founder and faculty director of the MIT Governance Lab, a group of social and behavioral scientists and design researchers who develop and test innovations in citizen engagement and government responsiveness. Her research focuses on accountability, governance, and political participation in developing contexts, particularly Africa and Asia. Professor Tsai has written 2 books, When People Want Punishment, Retribution Justice and the Puzzle of Authoritarian Popularity, and Accountability Without Democracy, Solidary Groups and Public Goods Provision in Rural China. Fascinated by how and why citizens under different regimes become active engaging their governments, in the best MIT tradition, she and her students aim to provide empirical evidence that bridges the gulf between academic research and real-world impact. From 2021 to 2023, she also served as the chair of the MIT faculty, and we're delighted that she agreed to lead the discussion following today's talk. So for now, please join me in welcoming Dalia Mogahed to the stage.
Thank you so much, President Kornbluth and Chancellor, and all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. You heard a little bit about my background, but something you didn't hear is that I was almost a member of this very community, MIT. Not really me, but my father. So my father came to the United States to pursue his graduate work in engineering, and he applied to this illustrious university and was actually accepted. But he opted to reject that exception, not come here, because he was under the impression that he needed to go to a real university, not an institute of technology. This is a true story. And it does illustrate a very important point, that my father missed the opportunity to study at the top engineering school in the world because he misunderstood language. He misunderstood what this university is about, and what misled him was a simple word. And in so many ways, we miss out on opportunities because of misunderstandings. And that's really what this talk is about. Islamophobia, a threat to all. So this is based on research that I led at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. ISPU provides objective research and education about American Muslims to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making. We are a nonpartisan, non-religious think tank based in Washington, D.C. So what to expect today? We're going to talk about what is Islamophobia, why is there so much of it, what is the impact on society, and what can be done about it. So let's just start with a simple definition. What is Islamophobia? When I say Islamophobia, what am I talking about? I'm talking about anti-Muslim bigotry and discrimination based on an irrational hatred or fear of Islam. Now, at ISPU, and I am myself an engineer by training, we like to measure things with numbers, and so we created an Islamophobia index. And here's what that index is, the anatomy of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is built on 5 key tropes. Now, there's lots and lots of stereotypes that someone could find out there about who Muslims are that are negative. But based on other research, namely by the late Dr. Emile Bruno, these are the 5 negative false tropes about Muslims that when people endorse them, they are linked to endorsement of bad policies, of anti-democratic policies, of discriminatory policies. And so those are the tropes that we measure in the public and among different subgroups within the United States. And here they are. Again, I hate to even say these out loud, but these are the negative stereotypes. Most Muslims living in the United States are more prone to violence than others, discriminate against women, are hostile to the United States, are less civilized than other people, and are partially responsible for acts of violence carried out by other Muslims. So essentially, it is about violence, misogyny, backwardness, hostility, and collective blame. So why these questions? Because these 5 variables are based on previous research that link these perceptions to greater tolerance for anti-Muslim policies, such as mosque surveillance, racial profiling, greater scrutiny of Muslims at airports, the so-called Muslim ban, and even taking away voting rights for Americans who are Muslims. So what drives Islamophobia? What is behind it? So most will assume, including myself before I looked at the research, that the terrorist attacks of 9/11 are to blame. But what really surprised me is I found this research out of Pew that was the only research I've seen that actually had public opinion about Muslims pre-9/11. And what you see here is that the favorability of Muslims in the United States actually rose slightly between March of 2001 and November of 2001. So the attacks of 9/11 do not explain anti-Muslim bigotry. And I'll show you a wider shot so you can kind of look at the entire trend. So this is specifically looking at the question of linking Islam and violence, one of the most pervasive and damaging tropes that Muslims are targeted with. And so the question is Islam more likely than other religions to encourage violence? And this is the percentage of Republicans and Democrats who answer yes to this question across the past, say, 20 years. So here's what you should notice, is when that percentage spikes. Right after 9/11, this is 2002, is the first time this question was asked, 23% of Democrats and 32% of Republicans answered yes to this question. Notice when it goes up. Not right after 9/11, but in the run-up to the Iraq War, and then around elections. In fact, in 2017, 65% of Republicans affirmed or endorsed this stereotype compared to only a third right after 9/11. So this is the power of political rhetoric. It is not, this view is not explained, cannot be explained by the actions of bad actors that claim to be Muslim. That is not how the trend works. The trend follows domestic politics. And this suggests that Islamophobia is a tool of public manipulation. And it also is a false notion, a false idea, a racist idea. Most Muslims are actually the most likely to reject military targets on civilians of any group in the United States. And Muslims, Jews, and non-affiliated people are the most likely to reject individual attacks on civilians of the different faith communities that are surveyed. Moreover, most American terrorism casualties actually happen at the hands of right-wing extremists. And that includes the assessment of law enforcement. And just another fact that you may or may not be aware of, right-wing extremists kill more cops than any other group. So what explains this widespread perception? Media coverage is overwhelmingly negative when it comes to the portrayal of Muslims. 90% of coverage of Muslims and Islam is negative in TV news media, according to a study in 2015 by an organization called Media Tenor. Now, it's interesting to compare that year media coverage of North Korea, a country that was literally threatening the United States with nuclear annihilation, was only 73% negative, versus Muslims and Islam, a very diverse community of which most majority Muslim countries are actually allies of the United States, was 90% negative. Another study found that over the past 25 years, the New York Times portrayed Islam and Muslims more negatively than cancer and cocaine, and this precedes 9/11. Unequal media coverage isn't just how Muslims are portrayed, but how often are they mentioned in regards to violence. So in the case of violent ideological plots that were not carried out, these were plots that were stopped by law enforcement, Muslim perceived perpetrators received 770% more media coverage than non-Muslim perceived perpetrators planning a similar plot. And this is an evaluation of the Washington Post and the New York Times only, the two most authoritative and trusted news sources in the United States, and also ones that people claim are liberal. So spot the media bias in this headline. Majority of fatal attacks on U.S. soil carried out by white supremacists, not terrorists. And that is an actual headline. There's also something called the Islamophobia industry, and this is a documented network of individuals and institutions that have access to millions of dollars, and their entire mission is to churn out content that is hateful and fear-mongering of Muslims. So if those types of things help to explain the prevalence of Islamophobia, whether it's political rhetoric for specific political goals, media bias, and so forth, what is the impact on society? Why am I making this bold claim that Islamophobia is a threat to all? Because Islamophobia makes everyone less safe and less free. So let's start with what's easy. It's bad for Muslims. That's not shocking, right? Muslims are the most likely faith community to say that they have experienced some frequency of religious-based discrimination in the last year. Now, this is very new data. In fact, it won't be out until next week, where this survey was fielded in January of this year. So this is in the current climate. How often, if at all, have you experienced discrimination in the past year because of your religion? And what you find here is that the majority of both Muslims and Jewish Americans report experiencing some frequency of religious discrimination. And the total percentage of people in both communities that have experienced it is very similar. Right? So 74% of Muslims and 68% of members of the Jewish community experience some frequency of religious-based discrimination in the past 12 months. In both communities, that is up since 2022. So it's up about 10% among Muslims and a similar percentage among the Jewish community versus 2022. Where Muslims stand out is that 15% say it's happening regularly, and that's twice as likely as both the general public as well as Jewish Americans. By the way, and I didn't go into this in the slides, that number among students is 84%. So it's even higher than the elevated number of the general Muslim community. Now, what makes Muslims stand out isn't just the fact that they are slightly higher in their likelihood of experiencing religious discrimination at some frequency, but the nature of that discrimination. In that, Muslims are the most likely group to face discrimination in institutional settings, whether that means when applying for a job, when interacting with law enforcement, of course at the airport, when receiving health care even, and then on social media from social media platforms. And it doesn't just stop at adults. Nearly half of Muslim families report a child that they have in school from K through 12 has faced some frequency of religious bullying, where 20% say it's happening nearly every day. And you can see the comparison among Jewish Americans and the general public. Now, I want to just point out that we are only interviewing adults. We're interviewing adults who are parents who have kids. So this is the percentage of adults, of parents who have heard from their child that they've been bullied. And we all know, we've all been kids, we don't always tell our parents when we're bullied, and so that number may be much higher. But I think what's most concerning is not only that, you know, more than half a family say that their child was bullied, but the source of the bullies, because in many cases, it's an adult, a teacher or an administrator. You can see here, 42% say that the source was a teacher or school official at school, and it's even happening online from adults. And less safe, not only in terms of discrimination, but in terms of things like assaults. And this is data from the FBI, just as far as 2016. You can see how in 2016, those numbers exceeded what they were right after 9/11. It makes, I want to put a face to that, you know, statistic. These 3 young men, very recently in Vermont, Tahsin, Kinan, and Hisham, were shot simply for speaking Arabic and wearing a kufiyya, which is their scarf in solidarity with their Palestinian roots. And Hisham may never walk again. He is currently in a wheelchair because of the injuries he sustained. So Islamophobia alters lives. It's also lethal. This is Wadia al-Fayoumi, who was stabbed 26 times by his landlord, a child of 6 years old. This was in Chicago last October. It makes everyone less safe, though, because it strengthens terrorist rhetoric. This is a screenshot of an actual recruiting video for Al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization in Somalia, where clips of American presidential primary debates were used in the video to recruit people to this militant group, showing the anti-Muslim, anti-Islam, Islamophobic rhetoric used by American politicians as proof that America is hostile to Islam. So Islamophobia makes us less safe. It strengthens the rhetoric of our enemies. And Islamophobia also opens the door and strengthens and fuels other types of bigotries, especially anti-Semitism. Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are 2 branches on the same tree of bigotry. And, you know, these are empirical results. The variable most strongly linked to self-reported prejudice toward Muslims is self-reported prejudice towards Jews. So respondents who say that they feel a great deal of prejudice toward Jews were 32 times as likely to report feeling a great deal of prejudice toward Muslims. And this is a study from Gallup in 2010. And so it's interesting and important to look at Muslim-Jewish views of each other. If the 2 types of bigotries that are so that are impacting both communities are so linked, how are these communities viewing each other? What we found is that Jews are the most favorable toward Muslims of any faith community in America, with white evangelicals being the least favorable toward Muslims. Jews and Muslims also mirror each other's views of views of each other. So the positivity is mirrored by both Muslims and Jews. And then, interestingly, Jews are the most likely to know a Muslim. That is understandable in terms of both communities are more urban, are overrepresented in universities, and so forth. And why that's important is because we found that knowing a Muslim, and especially having a Muslim as a close friend, is linked to, unsurprisingly, far lower scores on the Islamophobia index. Those who know a Muslim are also twice as likely to be favorable toward Muslims than those who do not know a Muslim. Islamophobia also opens the door to anti-Black racism. So endorsing anti-Muslim tropes is strongly linked to prejudice and racism against African American and Black Americans. And again, this is a source in some ways of solidarity. Muslims are the most likely faith group to support the Black Lives Matter movement. And Muslims, you know, these two groups are not mutually exclusive. Muslims are the most ethnically diverse faith community in America, and the plurality of Muslims identify as Black or African American at 28%. So fear, in summary, fear erodes freedom. According to neuroscience research, fear makes us more accepting of authoritarianism, conformity, and prejudice. Islamophobia is a danger to democracy. And these are some of the results we found in regression analysis on the Islamophobia index. Islamophobia is bad for democracy and security because a higher Islamophobia index score is linked to greater acceptance of military targeting of civilians in the public, greater acceptance of individual targeting of civilians. So the more that the public endorses anti-Muslim tropes, the more likely they are to endorse the idea of targeting innocent people with violence. A greater acceptance of authoritarian attitudes like suspending checks and balances and limiting freedom of the press. And then finally, and unsurprisingly, higher Islamophobia index scores are linked to greater support for discriminatory policies toward Muslims, like the Muslim ban and targeting Muslims and mosques for surveillance. So what can we do? What are some recommendations to address Islamophobia if it is indeed a threat to democracy and to all of us? Islamophobia trainings are incredibly important, and workshops led by experts in that field. We need to integrate anti-Islamophobia mandates and pledges within organizational agendas. We need to integrate Islamophobia more robustly in grassroots anti-racism movements rather than having it be seen as a separate, problem. We need to create more humanizing media and more accurate reporting. And we need to promote religious literacy so that folks understand what Muslims actually believe. So what will you do? You can challenge bigotry. You can preach to those who aren't in the choir in your network. So I often get told, someone will always say, well, you're preaching to the choir. We're all on the same page. We're all here at this elite university. Okay, even if that's the truth, even if that is the case, and everyone here already knew all this, that's fine. Your uncle doesn't know it. Everyone else on your, social media doesn't know it. So be an ambassador for the facts. Call out biased media coverage and build coalitions for a stronger, more pluralistic America. Finally, we know that most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, want to live in a country where no one is targeted for their religious identity. And we all have a part to play to make that the case. Thank you so much.